Have you ever seriously looked at the fork on your table? It seems like such a boring, simple object. But for 99% of human history, putting metal into your mouth was considered madness. It was an insult to God. It was a sign that you were weak, spoiled, or even possessed by the devil. People actually died because they used this tool. Today, we are going to explore the scandalous history of the fork. Why did the church ban it for centuries? Why did men refuse to touch it? And why does it have exactly 4 tines instead of 2 or 5? Put down your sandwich. We are digging into the dirty, dangerous history of the fork. Let's go back to the days of ancient Rome. The tables are loaded with meat, wine, and bread. But one thing is missing. You see knives, sharp weapons used for both war and steak. You see spoons, basically seashells on a stick. But you do not see forks. The Romans actually had a tool called the fusinula. But it was a massive, heavy trident used strictly in the kitchen to pull boiling beef out of pots. Using it at the table? Impossible. The rule of etiquette was simple. God gave you 5 fingers, so you must use them. Rich people ate with 3 fingers to keep their pinkies clean for dipping into spices. Poor people ate with their whole fist. The fork tried to enter the dining room in the year 1004, and it caused a disaster. A Byzantine princess arrived in Venice to marry the Doge. She brought a case of golden 2-pronged forks. At the wedding feast, instead of using her hands, she delicately speared a piece of fruit. The guests were horrified. The priests were furious. They saw this golden stick as a sign of extreme vanity and pride. Cardinal Peter Damian famously preached, "God in his wisdom has provided man with natural forks, his fingers. It is an insult to substitute them with metal." When the princess died of the plague shortly after, the church announced it was God's punishment. The fork became known as the devil's pitchfork. So, how did the fork survive the wrath of the church? The answer is delicious: pasta. By the Middle Ages, Italy fell in love with noodles. Try eating hot, slippery spaghetti with your fingers. You will burn your hands and look like a clown. The knife was useless. The spoon was messy. Italians needed a tool. They took the kitchen fork and shrunk it down. By the 14th century, every merchant carried a personal fork. But these forks looked different. They had only 2 straight, sharp tines. Perfect for twisting pasta, but terrible for anything else. If you tried to scoop peas or rice with a 2-pronged fork, the food would just roll off. But Italians didn't care. They had clean hands. When Catherine de' Medici brought forks to France in 1533, the French court laughed at her. In France, eating with metal was considered unmanly. Real men ate with knives. They stabbed the meat, brought the sharp blade to their lips, and bit the meat off. It was dangerous and masculine. Using a fork was seen as something only women or sissies would do. Courtiers mocked those who tried to use them. They wrote about people dropping food on their giant collars and looking clumsy while trying to be elegant. The fork was a joke. Even the famous writer Montaigne admitted that he ate so fast he sometimes bit his own fingers. But he still refused to use a fork. England was even worse. In 1608, an English traveler named Thomas Coriat visited Italy. He saw the fork in action. He thought it was brilliant hygiene. He returned to London and started using one. His friends roasted him. They gave him the nickname Furcifer, which meant fork bearer. But Furcifer was also slang for criminal or slave. They asked him why he was afraid to touch his food. Was he sick? It took another 100 years for England to accept the tool. The main reason was fashion, the Elizabethan ruff collar. Those giant, stiff collars made it impossible to lift a hand to the mouth. You needed long tools to bridge the gap. As collars shrank, forks became popular. Now, look at the fork in your kitchen. It has 4 tines, and they are curved. This is a relatively new invention. Remember the problem with peas? The old 2-pronged fork was just a spear. You couldn't scoop sauce or rice. In the late 17th century, smart cutlery makers added a 3rd and 4th tine. And then they curved the metal. This turned the fork into a hybrid spoon. Now you could spear meat and scoop veggies. The knife lost its job as the king of the table. Before this, the knife loaded the spoon. Now, the knife was just for cutting. The fork became the dominant tool. But the evolution of the fork did not stop there. It got crazy. Welcome to the Victorian era. The 19th century was obsessed with etiquette. They decided that using one fork for everything was too simple. They invented a specific fork for every single food item. If you sat at a dinner party in 1890, you would face a terrifying puzzle. There was a special fork for oysters, a fork for pickles, a fork for sardines, a fork for strawberries, even a fork for ice cream. This wasn't about convenience, it was a social trap. If you picked up the sardine fork to eat your salad, you were socially destroyed. It was a way to spot the new money or the poor. The fork became a weapon of class warfare, guarding the gates of high society. But there was another problem: the taste. For centuries, forks were made of iron or silver. Iron rusted and made your food taste like blood. Silver was great, but it was expensive and soft. If you were not a king, you were eating with a tool that tasted like old pennies. The revolution happened in 1913. A man named Harry Brearley in Sheffield was trying to make better gun barrels. He accidentally invented stainless steel. This changed the fork forever. Suddenly, you could have a shiny, clean, tasteless tool that never rusted, and it was cheap enough for everyone. The steel fork democratized dining. The poor could finally eat with the same dignity as the rich. The etiquette barriers were smashed. Now, let's talk about that weird American habit again: the cut and switch. Why do Americans still shuffle their cutlery like a deck of cards? Europeans keep the fork in the left hand. This is called the continental style. It is efficient. You never put your tools down. But early American colonists imported old forks that didn't have curves. They were straight, sharp spikes. You couldn't scoop with them. You had to spear the food, and for that, you needed your strong right hand. By the time forks became curved, the habit was already culture. It is a relic of a time when dinner was a dangerous activity. But the evolution continues. In the 20th century, we got lazy. We invented the spork, a plastic genetic mutant, half spoon, half fork, and absolutely terrible at doing both jobs. The spork represents the end of the fork's dignity. It is the tool of fast food, schools, and prisons. A sad decline for a royal object. So, let's review the journey. We started with fingers, which the church called the only natural forks. We moved to the devil's pitchfork. We survived the mockery of the French court and the English taverns. We added tines, curved the metal, and mastered stainless steel. The fork is not just a tool. It is a barrier. It separates civilized humans from animals. It puts distance between our biology and our dinner. Before the fork, eating was a communal, messy, tactile experience. You touched what you ate. You were connected to the animal you consumed. The fork changed that. It made dining individual. It made it clean. It made it cold. But it also allowed us to read books while eating. So next time you look at those 4 curved tines, remember the scandalous Princess Maria. Remember the angry cardinal. Remember that you were holding a weapon of rebellion that defeated the church and changed the way the entire world behaves. And please, for the love of history, don't use a spork. You are better than that. Thanks for watching.